The problem that we have here isn't the same problem we've had in the past. We have a supply problem, a supply and demand problem. We have way pent up demand. We've been not building ever since 2008, 2010. We've been building 300 to 400,000 less homes than the market every year, and it's just catching up.
Welcome to the Disruptance Podcast. Here are your hosts, Eric Forney and Michael Bounds.
Mike, every week on the show, we aim to disrupt the way business owners and real estate agents think about their business and life. And this week, I want to disrupt the way you think about the 2021 foreclosure market. Everywhere we look, we see everyone in our business and in financing talking about this impending foreclosure bubble. And I know it's a topic that we seemingly have talked about multiple times over the past week, and yet still, time after time, we get questions about this impending boom of foreclosures. Right? We know that it was in late March. The federal government put in place a foreclosure moratorium, and that's expiring soon. And so we have to be on the precipice of this foreclosure bust, right? And what I'm here to say is you're going to be waiting a really long time for that foreclosure bust to happen. And that's because 2021 is not the year that we will see foreclosures at a really massive scale, despite how long people have been waiting for them and sitting on the sidelines. This is not your year. What say you, Mike?
I totally agree with you. The reason why I wanted the premise of this show was in my conversations that I'm having on a daily basis with real estate agents, as a common topic, they keep bringing up, oh, when these foreclosures are coming, the market will get better. But the information I'm telling them is the exact same thing. They're not coming. With moratoriums and the CARES Act, lenders they don't want their houses back. So I did a study, in studying this and coming up with different topics and doing research. I kept finding all these experts talking about this impending doom, this thing that's coming up. The problem that we have here isn't the same problem we've had in the past. We have a supply problem, a supply and demand problem. We have way pent up demand. We've been not building ever since 2008, 2010. We've been building 300 to 400,000 less homes than the market every year, and it's just catching up.
Why is it then that everyone thinks that we have this foreclosure market that we're like right on the cusp of? Where does all that come from?
I think that we're conflating a recession, and normally under normal circumstances, when you have a recession, the next domino to fall is housing. Two things are at play. One, this recession has hit disproportionately renters. So right now you're seeing renters not paying rent. The people that own homes typically have better jobs, and the ones that got hit were service industry, travel, all these restaurants, hotels, all these workers, and they typically rent. So what's happening is these homeowners, they kept their jobs. They got to work during the pandemic. And then they had all these forbearances. So in order to keep people in their homes.
Mike, I want to put a pin in this, but I want to just touch on this really quickly, and I'm going to come back to it. You said that the recession has hit renters the hardest, and that's certainly true. But when we look at the concept of forbearance and delinquent mortgagees, who's been hit the hardest? Minorities. I want to come back to that, but just quickly, I want to throw out a couple of stats. 36% of delinquent borrowers are borrowers who live in minority majority census tract. Okay, 36% of those in forbearance still live in predominantly minority census tracts. In fact, black women have seen a 9.7% decrease in employment year over year before the pandemic. The lowest rate of black women employment since 1993. And so I think there's so many things at play when we look at what makes up the current forbearance market and potential for impending foreclosure market that most people are ignoring the totality of the entire housing market and how it drives the entire US economy because we've said it so many times, there are social aspects of housing that are always at play that most people fail to take into account when they think about the idea of um, equity, or when they think about the idea of value as it pertains to having value in an asset like housing. Housing is both a storehold of wealth and a Maslow hierarchy of need as it pertains to safety, security, certainty, and stability. And so there are multiple aspects at play as we look at the foreclosure market right now. And there are social dynamics at play that also are contributing to why we will not see a foreclosure boom in 2021. And I think that's a good thing. And we'll touch on that. But I want to actually, here's why we won't see foreclosures, and that's because the thing that we have seen now for week after week is a decline in the number of homeowners who are still in forbearance. And every week that the number of homeowners who are in forbearance goes down, combined with every week that the housing market goes up in median home price, means that those that are underwater or would be underwater get more and more equity as a byproduct of the median home price going up over 16% nationally last year. And so this multi-dynamic facet of equity from a housing price appreciation standpoint and employment starting to go in the right direction, combined with government stimulus, is significantly improving what would be a massive amount of foreclosure influx.
So check this out. How long does it take to foreclose on a house on average?
Oh my gosh, I actually have no idea, but I know it takes forever. It
830
takes
days. On
how much? 830
on
days?
average, according, yes.
Wow.
So this is the thing, you guys. So if we're having all of this, we have a pandemic, we have a recession, we have moratoriums, we have the CARES Act, we have people losing jobs, then people, you literally have 2.25 years to find another
Wow.
job, and in that time your house is adding, gaining in equity, gaining in value. And so either you sell your house before it forecloses on, or it takes 2.25 years for it to foreclose. By that time your circumstances change, you can reach out to your lender and make arrangements in order to save it. I've seen them push mortgages out 40 years in order to make payments.
Yeah.
And also, I want to say this. I
Mike,
just want
it's
to say
interesting
this. If
because,
I have a 2-year-old pop
yeah.
in, just I hear over here squeaking. So anyway, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
uh, no, it's interesting because the reality is the government doesn't want to be in the home ownership business, right? And foreclosures are a costly business for banks to be in and for lenders to be in, and they don't want to foreclose either if they can avoid it, right? And so the goal here is to keep people in homes as long as possible because it's the greatest storehold of wealth for the middle class is real estate. And therefore, when people are foreclosed on, or when people lose their home or lose equity in their home, we have a significant disruptance of the actual middle class storehold of wealth. And that has a cascading effect on taxes. It has a cascading effect on employment. It impacts all other financial sectors, as we know from 2008 and 9, that the primary goal of the government and through stimulus is to avoid people losing their jobs and to create GDP. Real estate ends up being a large component of that. And thankfully, regulation is still incredibly high and incredibly stringent when it comes to real estate, and arguably it's getting more stringent as a byproduct of all the stimulus that we've seen. We've seen the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac cut back on second home and investment property mortgages. That's a good thing for first time home buyers and for those that are looking to buy their primary residence. All these things are mitigating the risk of foreclosures hitting the market because the Federal Reserve has the primary objective of increasing GDP and decreasing unemployment. Both have positive impacts on real estate
Yeah,
and
foreclosure
on
activity
mitigating
is actually
foreclosure.
down 90% year over year. So even though we have, I don't have the exact number in front of me, even though we have a lot of people that are 90 days behind, they're getting the time with, like you said, stimulus, with the moratoriums, and like I said, with the lag in the actual foreclosure. If these, for one, if these real estate agents are waiting on a glut of foreclosures, they're just going to be waiting a long time. There's too many nannies guardrails in
That's right.
place that's going to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, Mike, there are 2.23 million homeowners in forbearance. Okay, understand that that sounds like a large number, right? Yet the reality is that's less than 5% of the entire housing market currently in forbearance. Okay, just understand this, that 6% of households bought houses last year. So there are more people that bought homes last year than there are in forbearance. That's in one calendar year. We are at a little under 2 months worth of supply of housing right now. If if you were to dump 2.23 million homes on the market, now that's a different story. That creates a certainly a market surplus. But remember, annually we're seeing about 6 million houses transact based on the 2020 numbers. So 6 million homes a year transact. That would mean that only a third of 1 year's available inventory is in forbearance. Traditionally, what we've seen is 10% of homes that are in forbearance turn into foreclosure. I think that number will likely be a little higher, but even then, we see almost 300,000 homes be foreclosed on year after year. That's a healthy number.
That's the same
Remember,
number
not
we have
everyone
every year.
forecloses on a home. Yeah, that not everyone forecloses on a home because um, they ran into hard times or bad luck, all those things. Sometimes foreclosure might actually be a way out or the easiest option for someone. And so it might be a choice to foreclose. And so we'll still always see a healthy level of foreclosures. This year is not going to create a significant surplus of foreclosures because the primary role right now of the current administration is stabilizing the economy. And the last thing on earth this administration wants to do is disrupt housing, which is by far the best market sector in all of the economy right now and the largest.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100.
So one of the
I'm
things,
sorry, go ahead.
no, one of the things I wanted to get your take on, Mike, is earlier in the conversation I mentioned that that disproportionately those that have been impacted by the current forbearance market and the current impact on employment as it pertains to this post-pandemic employment sector is minorities. And if everyone doesn't watch or listen to the podcast on YouTube, we look different from a complexion
Yeah,
standpoint. So um, I'm not the guy to probably be the expert on minority housing. So I'm going to defer to you because certainly I wasn't aware of what the impact was on the minority sector as far as housing is concerned and as far as the forbearance aspect is concerned. But overwhelmingly, 36% of borrowers who are in majority minority census tracts are those that are in forbearance. And and we know that it's significantly impacted minority census tracts and minority borrowers more than it has other demographics of the population. And so What I want to know is do you think that part of the government response right now is aimed at trying to mitigate the
I
impact
think
of that?
so. That's what I'm hearing. What you're seeing is systemic. There's been so for one, black owned homes don't have the equity. They don't appreciate the same as in a predominantly white area. So you're seeing the some of the benefits. We're being told the American dream, buy a home. But when we buy a home, that American dream doesn't really apply to us because we don't gain the same equity as everybody else. What you're seeing is you're seeing the remnants. I want to change that. The residue. What you're seeing is the residue of policies enacted by the government early on. And so what's happened is you had redlining, you had all this where people were in this area and everybody had to go to this area and build wealth. Well, if I own a home in a redlined area, those homes don't go up as much as in value as outside of that area. And now look, 50 years later, if I want to have that same wealth, I don't have it. So, I mean, I don't want to get into like a whole history lesson on how that goes. But then you also look, a lot of the jobs are hospitality, service related jobs, etc. So this
Yeah.
impacted, minorities way more. There's a saying: whatever happens to Americans happens bef- first and way more severely to the African American community. So when we have a recession, it impacts. If you look at
Yeah.
unemployment, there's unemployment, and then there's black unemployment. You see what I'm saying? And the reason it's the
Yeah.
lowest, the
Yeah.
lowest of you're in the
Yeah.
back, right? So you're seeing that play out in these
Yep.
forbearances. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And you're seeing it. I think you're seeing it show up
Yeah.
in some of the policy as well. And I think that that's actually a good thing. At least maybe in my naive perspective, it's showing up in policy. And that our current administration, and this is pre-election and post-election, because a lot of it's driven by the Fed, right? And so the Fed is Jerome Powell and the team at the Fed have been the same um, at the beginning of the pandemic as they are here midway through 2021. So this doesn't necessarily mean it's a Republican or Democratic issue at the exact time. However, the Jerome Powell has been very clear that his objective is to increase employment or the negative impact of unemployment in the minority sector. Because that was the area of the jobs market that was hit the hardest was, as you mentioned, the service industry, the hospitality industry that's often made up of the minority portion of the population is that significantly was negatively impacted. And so a lot of the policies and a lot of the stimulus efforts are intended to improve that segment of the market, and that's a good thing. One, it's a good thing because obviously it helps to stabilize the economy, and two, it's a good thing from a social perspective, right? It's having the awareness that there are those that are disproportionately impacted, as you mentioned, Mike. Um, and have we gotten it right? No, no, absolutely not. In fact, if we've gotten it perfectly correct, right, there would be equal distribution of impact as a byproduct of the pandemic, and that didn't happen. And now we see a lot of talk about why we didn't get it right, or why there is the existence of, to your point, some residue of prior systems that maybe haven't been beneficial for some markets or some demographics of the pandemic. And one of them impacted the most, as I mentioned, was Black women, and that's because it's multifaceted, especially when we look at the housing sector, especially, and it's single mothers who had the cost of childcare, high student debt, and those that were traditionally in service sectors of the market, which we know are typically going to be minority women. We know that Black women have a higher amount of student loan debt than Black men do. We know that single mothers obviously were impacted significantly by COVID as a byproduct of schools being unopened, and that's why we see disproportionately a significant number of the impact being on the minority segment of our population. And that's also why I'm incredibly thankful that a lot of the Recovery Act and a lot of the provisions right now are aimed at increasing um, aid to a segment of the population that has been most impacted by the consequences of COVID and our response.
Do you know that black home ownership is as low as it's been in the 1970s? The gap
No.
between white homeowners and black homeowners is widening. The same things happen in real estate, the haves and the have-nots. This this
Yeah.
virus is a magnifying glass, and it's just exposing the systematic. This is the thing. Not on okay. So these women, the women that are raising disproportionately, working in forbearance and all this good thing. Just a generation ago, systematically, the males were arrested. They're throwing out felonies like
Yeah.
candy in the 90s. So now they're
Yeah.
locked up.
Yeah.
Just think of the
Yeah.
foundation. Now, here, 2020, we have this pandemic, and this is the result.
Yeah. One of my favorite commentators and really pop culture, like talking heads, I guess, would be a guy by the name of Scott Galloway. And Scott Galloway has said that if the pandemic impacted skinny, wealthy white people the same way that it
Y'all
did
fix it.
everyone else, we would have come up with a different response.
We
Yeah.
fixed it.
Yeah. And it is unfortunate, but the reality is that largely over the aggregate of the population, right? There certainly we have seen that demographic, and by that demographic, remember that like I'm putting a mirror up in my own face with that, and because as sad as it is to say, is I actually came out ahead as a byproduct of the current of our most recent response, and that tells me that it wasn't equally distributed, right? Is there shouldn't have necessarily been the opportunity for one specific demographic or others to get unequally ahead. Whether it was by design or not, I don't know. Um, the reality, though, is that largely occurred, and you can see that show up, especially in the numbers and in the data. And so the good news, as we kind of wrap things up here, is the good news is that we have the awareness now that there's a need to provide resources, provide focus and attention on closing the gap that exists. Whether it will be too little, too late, I don't know. Time will tell. And the second piece of good news is that we won't see a foreclosure crisis happen in 2021. We will buck the trend. It has been 18 months post a spike in unemployment that we have historically seen foreclosures rise, and we will defy that trend with the numbers that come out now, 18 months post the beginning of this pandemic, because we won't see foreclosures at the rate that others are expecting. If you're still on the sidelines, you're going to be waiting a long time to see a significant amount of increase.